Hello, everybody. I'm Jeremy Agnew, host of the Grimdark History podcast, where we explore the intersection between history and popular fiction. This is more of a thank you episode, just to say hello to everybody and tell you how grateful I am that you have been on this experience and journey with me and are taking an interest in the podcast and what I have to say. I'm very happy to say that as of the time you're hearing this episode, we have significantly surpassed 10,000 total downloads of the podcast. This podcast started almost a year ago to the day was when the first episode was released. And in 1 year, I did not think I would be anywhere close to 10,000 downloads, let alone blowing past it. But I have you to thank for that. Without you having an interest in popular culture and history and how those things work and interact with each other, there would be nobody listening and geeking out on this with me. So I wanted to say thank you for this and just talk a little bit about all the journey that we've done so far and what will be coming up in the next few months for the Grimdark History podcast. Season 1, of course, has been all about the popular fictional character, the Emperor of Mankind from the Warhammer 40,000 popular fiction universe. He's an immortal human. He's popped in and out of ancient history, being a number of significant historical figures. What we did was look through the various parts of the lore that's been written down by him and tell the story of the different people that he's been and of the context and times of the places that we know about. We know definitively he was born in Copper Age Anatolia, early Bronze Age Anatolia, somewhere between 3000 and 2300 BCE. We know this because of a couple of main reasons. We know the language he spoke was a Proto-Indo-European precursor to Hittite. And we know that there was a rough bronze knife in the village that he lived in. And we know that Proto-Hittite is an actual language that was starting to be spoken around 2500, 2300 before Common Era. And we know the Bronze Age didn't really start in Anatolia till around 2700 before Common Era, a few hundred years, give or take, either direction. We also know he was born on the banks of the Sakarya River, which is a legitimate river in modern-day Turkey. It's roughly a half day from coastal traders, and doing some math and Google searching on how far a sailboat can sail up a river. I was able to just do some rough napkin math, and we figured out that village that he was born in would have been roughly near modern-day Sarıgazi in Turkey, which is a community on the banks of the Sakarya River. In addition to this, to kind of understand the life of the Copper Age, our very first episode ever was on the real-life Copper Age shepherd called Ötzi, and you can look that up if you're interested. He was found frozen in a glacier in the Italian Alps in the early 90s, and everything I talked about in that first episode was based on all the real-life diagnostics done of the body of Ötzi in the last few years. We know what he ate for his last meal, the time of year that he died, where he was in the Alps. We know there's blood from several different people on arrows and a knife he had. We know he had deep wounds in his hands and he died from being shot in the back with an arrow. It tells a dramatic story, a ghastly end, and our very first episode was taking all the things that we know about him and imagining what his last couple days might have been like. We also explored the early world of the Bronze Age, the late Copper Age, Bronze Age, exploring how connected the Mediterranean was becoming. We explored the birth of civilizations in Egypt, in Mesopotamia, and in the Balkans. Looking into the Mediterranean, we also explored the last days of the Minoans. We explored the Theran tsunami, which was the result of a massive volcanic eruption that nearly completely destroyed the island of Akrotiri, which is modern-day Santorini. Still remnants of that island is left over. We looked at the myth of Theseus and the Minotaur and its context within the Warhammer 40,000 popular fiction universe and the character of Ollanius Persson, who was an immortal, who was the figure of Theseus in this universe. Moving into the early Iron Age, we looked at the destruction of the Tower of Babylon, the history of Mesopotamia, specifically around the city of Babylon. We looked at some significant Babylonian kings, what they did, how Babylon power waxed and waned, its religion, its culture. We also looked at the rise of Assyria, its religion and culture, its domination of the Mesopotamian region, and ultimately the destruction of the Tower of Babylon by Assyrian king Sennacherib. We know the Emperor of Mankind was Assyrian king Sennacherib, basically from an analysis of the technology used in the author's description of the Tower of Babylon, the construction materials used, the things that adorn the wall, the fact that there was a crystal glass bowl. We looked at whether or not the technology of glass was available, when that was, if that lined up with any kings or whoever it was that destroyed or potentially raided the Tower of Babylon. And then we went through roughly 1,600 years of history of significant attacks on the city of Babylon, who they were, whether or not anybody would have raided the temple. And we were able to line up a piece of crystal glass with Assyrian king Sennacherib, who did actually destroy the Tower of Babylon. Next, we explored the Emperor of Mankind as Alexander the Great. If you've been following along, of course, we just wrapped up an epic 5-part series on the history of Alexander the Great. There was so much written about him. It was hard for me to find things that I could leave out and not feel like I was leaving something unsaid. So the series that I had originally just planned to be 3 episodes stretched into 5. We covered Alexander the Great's religion, the history, his father, the culture and people that he interacted with, the pressures within his own army and court, how those things all twisted together, interacted, brought down Alexander's conquest in India, the myth of whether or not Alexander wept when there were no more worlds left to conquer. We dug into that quote, the history and evolution of it, to go from its origins to modern-day popular fiction. And we are now just about to start in a few weeks' time our brand new series, which is exploring the life and times of Judeans around the time of Jesus of Nazareth. Beginning of roughly 200 years before that time, we had to start at the Maccabee Revolt in order to understand the context of what will lead to what's known as the Jesus movement and early Christians. We follow that up with roughly 1 generation after the death of Jesus to the First Jewish-Roman War, the revolt after the death of Emperor Nero. And we're exploring this specifically because we know the Emperor of Mankind was the figure of Jesus in this popular fiction. So we're looking at it from a historical perspective, And we're starting with the time of the Maccabees because everything that happens there is actually surprisingly critical foundation for understanding the time of Jesus or of Nazareth around early Roman control, and to understand the follow-up, the results of things that happen then that lead to the first Jewish revolt. And we're looking at that from a prospect of actual first-hand accounts of a Jewish priest who lived through that revolt, who led armies against Rome, who was caught and enslaved by Romans and survived, who wrote histories of the destruction of Jerusalem, of the Roman-Jewish War. So we have a fascinating first-hand account, and that's our next series that we're going to be talking about. And the last part of Season 1 is going to be the life of St. George, who's an early Christian Roman who died under the Diocletian persecutions of early Christians in the early 300s. And we're looking at St. George because we know the Emperor of Mankind, the last known historical figure he was before he disappears into the history books, he was St. George who fought a dragon. And so we're exploring the actual historical life of St. George. It's going to be fascinating, some of the early research I'm already starting to do on that. And you might be wondering about Season 2 of Grimdark History. I know you've been hearing the little intros beforehand, prompting you to stop by and drop a vote. Well, voting is officially closed, and I'm happy to say that we are going to be doing, as the topic for our Season 2, all the historical people and places of the characters of Anne Rice's Vampire Chronicles series. So that would be the Vampire Lestat, Interview with the Vampire, all those characters that have popped up through history. So we'll be exploring some exciting and interesting time periods. There is, of course, the novels, a movie, maybe actually several movies, and of course the recent television series, which has been a big hit. And some of those things play around with the characters, the exact times that they were around to tell an entertaining story to all of us. So part of my decision making will be deciding where we're going historically. We have New Orleans, we have antebellum South in the Mediterranean Sugar Islands. We have, of course, France, where Lestat was born. We have Rome by the vampire Marius. We have ancient Egypt with Akasha. We have Armand. So there's lots of different historical time periods and places to visit as we look through this, and I'm excited to visit all these places with you. So that's what Season 2 of the Grimdark History is going to be. We're going to be looking at all the historical times and places that all the famous vampires were in the Anne Rice's Vampire Chronicles series. Thank you so much for listening, for enjoying the show, for supporting it, for taking votes to let me know your thoughts and reaching out. I hope you stick with me as we come to the end of Season 1 and go into Season 2. And until then, I'm going to say goodbye to everybody. I'll catch you on the 1st of the month when the first episode of our brand new series is going to be dropping. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy the show.